It was a dark and stormy night, and Kate was walking home from her friend's house. She could hear the wind howling and the rain pounding against the pavement. As she walked down the empty street, she suddenly felt a chill run down her spine. She had the feeling that she was being watched. Kate looked around nervously, but there was no one there. She picked up her pace and quickened her steps, hoping to reach home soon. But then she heard a cackle, and she froze in fear. It was a sound she knew all too well, the laugh of a witch. She turned around and saw an old woman with a crooked nose and a pointed hat standing in front of her. The woman's eyes glowed a deep shade of red and her skin was ashen gray. Kate tried to scream, but no sound escaped her throat. The witch raised her hand and muttered an incantation. Kate felt a sharp pain in her head and her vision went black. Kate tried to struggle free, but the ropes were tied. She looked around the dungeon, and her heart sank when she realized she was not alone. There were other people there, all tied up and helpless like her. She could hear them whimpering and crying in fear. Kate tried to comfort them, but her words fell on deaf ears. They were too scared to listen to her. Kate had no idea how long she had been there when the witch finally came to visit them. She entered the dungeon and the air grew colder. The witch was surrounded by a strange air that made Kate's skin crawl. The witch cackled again, and Kate felt a shiver run down her spine. She knew that they were all in grave danger. "I have a special treat for you tonight," the witch said as she walked over to one of the prisoners. "You will be my next sacrifice." The witch grabbed the prisoner's hair and dragged them out of the dungeon. Kate could hear their screams echoing through the corridors. She knew that there was no escape from this place. Kate was terrified, but she knew that she had to find a way out. She started to look around the dungeon, hoping to find something that could help her escape. She noticed a loose stone in the wall and started to pull at it. Kate crawled through the tunnel, and it led her to a small room. She looked around, and her heart raced when she saw a pile of bones in the corner of the room. She realized that this was where the witch kept her victims. Kate searched the room and found a rusted key. She knew that it was the key to the dungeon. She crawled back through the tunnel and found the door to the dungeon. She used the key to unlock it, and the prisoners were finally free. They ran out of the dungeon and into the forest, not daring to look back. They didn't stop running until they reached the nearest town. Kate and the others went to the authorities and told them what had happened. But when they went back to the mansion, there was no sign of the witch or the dungeon. It was as if it had all been a horrible nightmare. But Kate knew the truth. She knew that the witch was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike again. And she knew that she would never forget the horrors she had experienced. The next morning, Sarah woke up in her bed, covered in sweat. She couldn't shake the feeling that the witch was still watching her. She got dressed and decided to go for a walk to clear her head. As she was walking, she heard a voice calling her name. She looked around but saw no one. The voice kept calling her name, becoming louder and more urgent. She started to run, but she couldn't escape the voice. Suddenly, she found herself in a clearing. In the center of the clearing stood the same witch from her dream. Sarah tried to run, but her legs wouldn't move. The witch started to chant in a language that Sarah didn't understand. She felt as if the words were piercing her mind. The chanting stopped, and the witch looked straight at Sarah. "You will serve me," the witch said. "Your soul belongs to me now." Sarah felt a sudden pain in her chest. She fell to the ground, writhing in agony. The witch stood over her, laughing. When Sarah woke up, she was back in her bed. She felt weak and disoriented. She looked at the clock and realized she had been asleep for hours. It was still daylight outside. Sarah got up and went to the kitchen to make some coffee. As she was making the coffee, she heard a knocking at the door. She hesitated for a moment but decided to answer it. On the doorstep stood a woman Sarah had never seen before. She had long, black hair and wore a black cloak. Her eyes were deep and dark, like the bottomless pits. "Hello, Sarah," the woman said. "My name is Celine. I have come to help you." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "How do you know my name?" she asked. "I know many things," Celine said. May I come in? Sarah hesitated for a moment but then stepped aside and let Celine in. Celine sat down at the kitchen table. You have been marked, he said. The witch has claimed you as her own. Sarah felt her heart racing. What can I do? She asked. There is only one thing you can do, Celine said. You must face the witch and break her spell. Sarah felt a wave of fear wash over her. How do I do that? She asked. Celine leaned forward. I can help you, she said, but you must trust me. Sarah didn't know what to do. She felt like she was trapped in a nightmare. Celine stood up. Come with me, she said. We don't have much time. Sarah followed Celine out of the house and into the woods. They walked for what felt like hours until they came to a clearing. In the center of the clearing stood the same witch from Sarah's dream. The witch turned to face them. What do you want? She asked. I want to make a deal, Celine said. The witch smiled. What kind of deal? A trade, Celine said. You release Sarah from your spell and I will give you something you want. The witch laughed. What could you possibly give me that I want? Celine pulled out a small bag from her pocket. She opened it, and a bright light shone out. The witch's eyes widened. A soul crystal, the witch said. I haven't seen one of those in years. Celine smiled. It's yours, but only if you release Sarah. The witch thought for a moment and then nodded. Deal, she said. Sarah felt a sudden release. She collapsed to the ground, gasping for air. Celine walked over too. The next day, the group decided to continue their search for the witch lair. They followed the stream, which led them to a dense forest. As they made their way deeper into the forest, the group heard strange whispers and rustling sounds. Their nerves were on edge, and they began to suspect that they were being watched. Suddenly they heard a loud cackle, and a figure appeared from the shadows. It was the witch. She was tall and thin, with long white hair and pale, sunken eyes. The witch spoke in a low, hissing voice. What brings you to my forest, mortals? The group tried to explain that they were only searching for the truth about the witch, but she seemed unconvinced. She told them that they had trespassed on her land and that she would have to punish them. The witch vanished into the shadows, and the group was left alone in the forest. Suddenly they heard a blood-curdling scream, and they ran towards the sound. They found one of their companions lying on the ground, his throat torn out. As they tried to help their friend, they heard the sound of approaching footsteps. The group realized that they were outnumbered, and they began to run. They fled through the forest. They were close to giving up when they saw a faint light in the distance. It was a small cottage, nestled in a clearing. They ran towards it, hoping for safety. As they approached the cottage, they saw a figure standing in the doorway. It was an old woman with kind eyes and a warm smile. She invited the group inside and listened to their story. The woman told them that she knew of the witch and her evil ways. She had been trying to stop her for years, but she was too powerful. The group realized that they had stumbled upon a powerful ally. The woman gave them a potion that would protect them from the witch magic, and she gave them a map that would lead them to the witch lair. The group thanked her and set out on their journey. They followed the map, winding through the forest and up a steep mountain path. As they climbed higher, the air grew colder and the wind howled around them. Finally, they reached the top of the mountain, and they saw the witch lair. It was a dark, foreboding castle, with towers that reached up to the sky. The walls were covered in ivy and moss, and the air was thick with the stench of death. The group took a deep breath and entered the castle. They searched the dark corridors, their hearts pounding with fear. Finally, they reached a large chamber, and they saw the witch. She was sitting on a throne, surrounded by her minions. Her eyes glowed with a sinister light, and her voice was cold and cruel. "You have come to challenge me," she said. "You are fools. You will never defeat me." The group drew their weapons and prepared to fight. The battle was long and fierce, but in the end the group emerged victorious. They had defeated the witch and her minions,